Hello, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about education, but it's a bit different. Just strap in. This one's going to be weird. I like talking about this stuff, so let's get into it. Did you know there are private universities in Europe that you can't apply to because you were never supposed to know that they exist? And I'm not talking about Oxford or Cambridge. I'm talking about legacy institutions with no public address, no application portal, no alumni directory. You're either born into them or you weren't. And the people who graduate from them, they don't go into jobs. They don't go be a account manager at Subaru or whatever, right? They inherit control. That's not conspiracy, that's just class structure in secrecy. So if you're listening to this, pause, breathe, and the next part of this video might change the way you look at life forever. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it to you. I'm wearing a mask. I can say things, but I still need to protect my identity. I grew up in a pretty nice area. I grew up in a pretty nice upbringing, but nothing like this. But I've been around to the point where haven't seen it. I've heard about it. I think it is happening because I've seen some pretty wild stuff. See, you and I, we're taught how to survive, how to work, get paid, maybe get a degree to get a better job. The normal structure of how normal people operate. That's our maze. But the top 0.001%, the people who live in 40,000 square foot houses up on the hills of who cares, they're not taught survival. They don't need to know how to survive. They're in a castle. They're taught strategy. They're taught control. They're taught influence. There are schools where classes revolve around how to manipulate global commodity markets, where debates aren't about right or wrong. They're about which narrative will win in 10 years. They're playing an insanely crazy game at that level where the idea of mediocrity is a fairy tale. You study just like how we studied Greek mythology and or random BS in our schools that didn't really matter. They're studying strategies that will matter in 10 to 15 years, that will change the way that normal people live. The textbooks that you never saw that aren't available to you in either your private schools or your public schools, they cover generational wealth strategies, geopolitical subterfuges, and psychological manipulation and institutional control. The tests that they take aren't multiple choice. They're real life simulations involving the sons of oil barons and the daughters of shadow banks and corporate raiders that gained access to so much money, so much wealth, so much power back in the day that they are not normal people anymore. They are so wealthy, so powerful that normal curriculum wouldn't matter. They need to be taught these insane strategies to keep the system going. And I'm not talking about Ivy League schools here. I'm not talking about Brown or Harvard or any of those. We're talking beyond the veil, beyond what you and I perceive as normal. In order to accept this ideology that something weird is happening, you have to drop the ego and understand that you don't know what is happening. Like Bohemian Grove and the Bilderberg and the Davos, they sound like movie plots, but the attendees, they're not actors. They're not people that you see. They're the ones who write the rules, the CEOs of trillion-dollar companies and the prime ministers and the intelligent heads of global governments and media moguls. They're all in one room and they're talking strategy. And that would be a crazy room to be in. And I don't think I'm ever going to be in that room. I don't want to be in that room. That room is poisonous. The public is given press photos and vague agendas like economic resilience or climate innovation. What you don't see are the closed door conversations where the $1 billion moguls are seated with a nod, where currencies are strategized and elections. Well, let's just say this. If everything's being strategized, then everything's planned and narratives are structured in advance. Do with that information as you will, involving elections or normal politics and that kind of stuff. But here's a wild stat. Over 80% of global media is controlled by 6 corporations. If you think that's a coincidence, then you're wrong. It's coordination, and when these people meet, they aren't networking. They're syncing timelines. They're making sure everything is on the up and up so they maintain control. Have you ever noticed how certain people just know where to be or who to talk to and what to say to get doors opened? It's not charisma. It's a little bit of charisma, but it's coding. The elites speak in passphrases. They speak in secrets. They speak like how a fraternity has secret codes. If you say, "Have I seen you before?" and the other guy says, "Blah, blah, 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 blah," then you know that they're in the same fraternity. It's the same thing like that, but it's not passwords. It's passphrases. It's cultural signals that identify them as insiders. It might be a reference to a Rothschild vineyard, and you speak of it like you speak of them as winemakers, so you know that there's a $15,000 wine bottle out there. Or you joke about a book that only's been printed 500 times, or you're quoting an obscure 1800s philosopher that isn't on Google because he's actually saying things that matter, and Google censors that to the normal person. This language operates like a skeleton key. If you don't know it, you don't belong. It's not just what they know, it's what they keep out of your reach is what the real issue is. And this is where it's going to get weird. We're going to talk about grooming, but we're not going to talk about it in the creepy social media way of Minecraft YouTubers talking to that kind of sick stuff. That's disgusting. We're talking about it in a legacy power kind of way, where there's elite prep schools, often with $100-200 million a year tuition, which doesn't really matter, but just to put it into perspective of how insane it costs to send your kid to preschool. They start identifying candidates for control. The kids are tested and they're traced and they're molded and they're manipulated in a closed school system that elites created. Imagine a system where by age 13 your psychological profile has already been used to determine if you're a good future banker or a diplomat or an intelligence operative. It's not sci-fi. That's standard in some London and Swiss institutions because they can't just let anybody work and understand what they're doing in these generationally huge corporations. And by age 21, the best of them have spent summers in embassies and interned at legacy law firms, just huge ones, and shadowed military strategical meetings. And you and I, we're struggling with our FAFSA paperwork. There's a big disconnect. And now Ask yourself, why don't we know this? Why is your social media feed filled with influencer drama and TikTok trends of people jumping through fast food windows and people eating an absorbent amount of fast food? Because distractions is the most scalable force of control. And I'm making this video not trying to distract you. I'm making this video for me because I think it's cool, but if you want to watch, this isn't supposed to be a distraction. They don't need to hide this stuff. They just flood the system and the algorithms and social media with noise until your bandwidth is too fried to notice and keeps you focusing on your next dopamine hit, so you never ask, who's actually pulling the string? Now, I'm not saying go start your own think tank tomorrow, but start thinking like one. Read weird books. Trace institutions. Follow the money on your own. When you hear a narrative, ask who benefits from that narrative. Ask who benefits from that policy. Ask who benefits from whatever, and odds are it's not you. It's not people like you. When you hear a crisis, ask what window it opens for somebody else. Ask who has a huge insurance policy on what just happened. You don't have to be a billionaire to unplug from this circus that we found ourselves in. You need awareness, you need clarity, and you need will. You need discipline to not be sucked into the BS that they're feeding you. Because once you see the curtain pulled back, you can't unsee it. And it pisses you off a little bit. And once you know the game exists, you're already ready to play it differently. Thank you for watching. Thanks for sticking with me 12 minutes through this manic rant. It was fun to make. I really like these topics. And I'll catch you next time.